I'm Dr. Elizabeth Pummel. I'm a sports psychologist. I work with athletes to help them to enhance their performance, and I'm also a lecturer at Kingston University in London. So I teach students about sport and exercise psychology, and I also conduct research in important topics in sport and exercise psychology. So things like athlete well-being and promoting physical activity. There are two main focuses in sports psychology. The first one is how we apply psychology to sport to help athletes to enhance their performance. So we try to educate athletes about psychological skills and how they can benefit them when they're participating. And often athletes will have specific areas that they want to work on. So perhaps they get very nervous before competitions, or perhaps they get frustrated when they aren't playing very well. And we try to teach them skills to help them to be able to cope with those problems and to enhance their performance. The second focus in sport and exercise psychology is how taking part in activity can benefit mental health. So we know now that taking part in exercise can be good for self-esteem, and also exercise is sometimes now used as treatment for depression. So it's really critical that we promote physical activity amongst the population, but we do need to be careful that when people take part in sport or exercise, that it's structured in such a way that it promotes self-esteem. Especially in youth sport, it's really important that the environment is enjoyable for the young athletes. The mind is really important in sport. We know not just from scientific research how important it is, but also from athletes themselves. So all athletes will talk about how critical their mental skills are, and particularly at the top level, athletes will say that their mental skills made the difference between winning and losing, or perhaps getting a medal at the Olympics and missing out on a medal in such a situation. Other reasons why the mind is so important in sport is because every sport has a set of psychological demands which the athlete has to meet in order to succeed in that sport. So for example, if we look at something like tennis, it's a sport which is played over an extended period of time. So a match, particularly at the top level, in a Grand Slam event might last 5 hours or even more sometimes. So the athlete has to be able to keep their concentration point after point for that duration of time. It doesn't matter how good they are at hitting the ball if they're not able to focus for that period of time. One aspect of sports psychology which is often talked about is mental toughness. Now this is something which isn't necessarily well understood, but the research now does seem to suggest that it's made up of a number of factors which give an athlete a psychological advantage. So they're things like being confident, being focused, being determined, and being in control under pressure. In terms of how it's developed, we're not really sure whether it's something that's innate or whether it's something that has to be worked on, but it does seem to fluctuate through an athlete's career, which suggests that it is something an athlete has to work at. An example of a mentally tough athlete is Roger Federer. So he's an athlete who throughout his career has always been able to cope with pressure situations. However, he wasn't always like that as a teenager. There are lots of reports that he used to get very frustrated and he used to throw his racket. So it's certainly something that he's had to work on. So one of the techniques which sports psychologists use to help athletes to cope with pressure is imagery. So leading up to an important competition, the athlete can feel quite uncertain about whether they can cope with the demands of the situation. So we would encourage them to imagine themselves successfully dealing with those demands in order that they can feel more confident leading up to that competition. One of the other techniques we use in sports psychology is helping athletes with their concentration. So it's really important that they're able to stay in the present moment. So not thinking too much in the future about whether they'll win or lose, or thinking in the past about mistakes that they've made. So we start to help athletes to develop their concentration skills away from sport. So in a quiet room, we would give them something to focus on, which could be their tennis racket, for example, and they continually bring their attention back to that focus, regardless of any irrelevant thoughts. And we gradually move that into the sports situation. So into training, where they're trying to bring their attention back to what they're doing, perhaps it's the next serve that they're making, and then gradually into competition so that they're able to focus on the present moment in competition. So a lesson that we can all learn from top athletes is how important concentration is. So all athletes at all levels will have negative thoughts while they're playing. So it's really important that athletes realise this and that they work on their concentration skills so that they don't believe the thoughts that they're having in their head are true. So they need to be able to focus on what they're doing while they're playing rather than on those negative thoughts.